Good morning. Good morning. Today we're going to address some questions from some students as well as a doctor friend of mine. So shout out to the upper cervical students out there. They are working hard and really preparing for practice excellence when they graduate. There are some amazing upper cervical leaders in school right now that are in the incubating period, that are learning and growing and developing their skills. So shout out to you upper cervical students. And this is kind of concluding a series that was started by Paul West of Life University. He and the Life Upper Cervical Club there sent out a bunch of questions, and I'm just rounding out my answers to some of them. And so the question that was asked, and we're just going to dive right into it. The two questions actually. There's a question on thermography and how we explain it to patients and providers, and that was from the Upper Cervical Club, the students, how do we explain this thing called thermography? And then we're going to get into a question by my good buddy Derek, who is a upper cervical chiropractor in Kansas, and he was just asking about, what about patients that have to drive, 5 hours one way? How do you address that? How do you make recommendations around that? So those are the topics for this morning. And we're just going to get started. If you have any questions, let me know. If I get a random phone call on my cell phone, I will mute it. But if you have questions, let me know. And as always, thanks for engaging. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being a part of the community. So let's talk about it. Let's see. First question on thermography. Do you use thermography? Yes, I do. I really think it's important. How do you explain thermography to your patients or even to other providers? So thermography is just like anything else in the practice. You have to build context. I'm not going to come right out and talk about thermography to a new patient. Every bit of communication with patients has to be within the context of their kind of understanding of health and their goals and kind of how they view the world, right? And at the end of the day, thermography is a tool that we use to be as precise as possible, to know when to adjust, when to leave you alone, how well the adjustments are working, things like that. But in my practice, I don't begin to talk about it until after I've done a consultation with the patient. And usually when I do consultations, I talk about a little bit of how accidents and injuries throughout our life can tear loose the connective tissue that holds the spine together. That tends to leave behind a weakness and misalignment within the spine. And one of the areas this happens the most often and the most damaging is in the upper neck. And this is because unlike any other area of the spine, the upper neck does not have any supporting discs, the cushions that support the vertebra. And I'll show them the models, And if you look at the atlas bone, it doesn't have any discs above or below it. And so it's the most movable, most vulnerable area of the spine. And because of the accidents and injuries we have in our life, very often, this particular area can get jammed out of place or misaligned or twisted. And that leaves behind two significant consequences that are unique to the upper neck that don't happen anywhere else. Number one, and this is where, if I explain the two things, it'll kind of depend on the patient's situation. So if they have a structural problem, I will explain the structural deficits of spinal misalignment first. If they have a functional problem, I'll explain the functional deficits that happen from a subluxation first. So it kind of depends on the patient. But when we do have a subluxated or misaligned atlas at the base of the skull, there are two unique things that do happen. This is just truth. This is what happens. The structural impact of that is that the weight of the head, which sits on the atlas bone, is about like 10-pound bowling ball. So it tends to shift out of alignment. And when that happens, now I'm going to exaggerate, but if this happens, this is very frustrating for the body. Usually the muscles in the base of the head will engage, and that can create like a dull headache. But at the end of the day, the larger muscles that connect to the head down to the shoulder are going to compensate and pull my eyes and ears on level. So now my brain's happy, but I'm walking around with an imbalance, not just in my neck, in my entire spine. So one shoulder tends to be high, one low, one hip is higher, one hip is lower lying down, one leg is longer, one leg is shorter. And over time, that can wear and tear on my joints, my shoulder, my back, my hips, etc., etc., etc. That's just one. That's just one thing. The other thing that happens, and this is probably the most important thing, is that a kink at the base of your skull can literally choke and squeeze the connection between the brain and the body and all the fluid that pulses between the brain and the body. Now that can lead to things like headaches, pressure headaches, ringing in the ears, dizziness, vertigo, blurred vision, anxiety, stomach problems, all these functional issues. And I'll kind of tie that in the conversation to some of the things that they may or may not have been dealing with, some of their history, etc., etc. Now, when it comes to thermography, the first time that usually pops up in a clinical conversation, because most of the time patients don't really care. They don't really care how we do what we do. They just want to know if we can take care of them, if we've seen patients like them before, if we get good results with the issues that they're dealing with. But I do want to explain to them how our process works. Like once I know your situation and I'm confident that I can help you, then all that's left to do is for me to tell you what's next. You know what I mean? And that's all patients really want to know. What's going on? What do I need to do? How much is it going to cost? Let's go. And so at that point I say, look, every office is a little bit different. So let me explain how we do things here. And literally on a blank sheet of paper, I will write down what their first 3 visits are going to look like. Now, some of this may change over time, but my point is, the first thing we do is a consult and screening. That's what we're doing now. And the screening is actually a temperature scan. Do you remember what I said, how when the upper neck misaligns, it puts pressure at the base of your brain? And that part of the brain is actually really critical. It controls all your vital functions, your breathing, your digestion, your hormone function, everything. But one of the things that it controls is your body temperature. So we have a scanner. We're going to roll up the back of your neck. It's completely painless, but it'll tell us if that part of the brain is under stress. The last time you got stressed out, your face probably turned beet red, right? That's fine. But imagine if one side of the face turned red and the other side was white as a ghost. That would not be normal, right? So it's not a matter of how hot or cold you are, but you should be balanced. You should be the same temperature on both sides of your body. We have a scanner. It'll tell us if you are or not. If you're not, there's a chance that you definitely have a lot of pressure in there. If that's positive, then we move on and we do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I explain the exams and the fees and everything. Does that make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Great. And then we go and we do the thermal scan. So I explain it in the consultation only after I've explained the impact of subluxation and spinal misalignment and what we are looking for. So it's like, you tell me your problem, I tell you what we correct. It sounds like they're related, and the way to get started is to see if you have what I correct, right? I correct subluxated spines. I don't fix headaches. So you have a headache. Headaches can be caused by spinal misalignment, but the first thing we need to do is determine if you have a spinal misalignment. It sounds like it does. We get great results with this sort of thing, but we need to validate that you have a problem that I can fix, not a condition that I can treat, a problem that I can fix. And the way we can determine that is through thermography. It's one of the most sensitive tools we have to see if there is irritation or pressure at the base of your skull. That's it. And when we go and we do the actual Titron scan, you have them sit up nice and tall, chin tuck, you run your glide, and you tell them, look, here's how this works. This is the temperature on the left side of your neck, and you point to the line on the left. This is the temperature on the right side of your neck, you point to the line on the right. The line in the center is the most important. That's the comparison between the two. And then maybe at that point is when I'll tell them about, it's not important how hot or cold you are. That could be anything. But whatever temperature you are should be the same on both sides. And then I'll kind of imagine if you got angry or ticked off or embarrassed, your face turns beet red. It's totally normal. But if one side turned red, one side turned white, that would be abnormal, right? That's not normal. So if the left and the right are the same temperature, that center line should be straight. And then I usually pause and allow them to assess it. And if they're truly subluxated, usually what you'll see is a lot of asymmetry in the temperature balance. I may or may not go over to the bar graph screen. If their line is relatively calm within 0.3 degrees, I may just leave it at that. You can double click the dialog box and shrink it down, which makes the line a bit more compact, where the line will kind of curve a little bit more, so it becomes a little more obvious. But, and I'll tell you this is important for students. The thermography is very valid. It's very accurate. So typically, people who have more structural problems, things like neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain, hip pain, but don't have a lot of functional issues, autoimmune issues, concussion issues, vertigo, digestive issues. Typically, those type of people, their scans are not that bad. It doesn't mean they're not subluxated. It just means the scan is not as demonstrative. Now, on the flip side, if you have someone who is really functionally out of balance, right? Dizziness, vertigo, anxiety, acid reflux, carpal tunnel syndrome, tinnitus, etc. Their scan really should be off. It usually is. And that's where you'll get the big orange bars and red bars pretty consistently. And then, of course, most people are a combination of the two. So everybody's a little different when it comes to the intensity on that bar graph screen. But I would argue 9 times out of 10, it's going to be accurate to them. And I do like the bar graph screen. Some people don't like the bar graph screen. What I would suggest is that people that come in and they're in the oranges and reds on the bar graph screen, you should, a lot of times, we see them get down to the greens and yellows. You know what I mean? Like that scan should settle down. And so I like the bar graph screen, but I won't usually pull it up if it's not going to be beyond a yellow, because it's not really as demonstrative for them. And then the follow-up question to this discussion on thermography was, how do we explain thermography to other healthcare providers? And that's actually pretty easy. I mean, what we're doing in our work is assessing how misalignments of the spine affect the autonomic nervous system. We know the brainstem regulates the autonomic nervous system, and we know the atlas is the most hypermobile segment of the entire spine. Maybe not hypermobile, but the most mobile segment of the entire spine. So instability and misalignment of the craniocervical junction can easily agitate the central nervous system at the level of the brainstem. And, you know, we could look at heart rate variability and pulse pressure and these different tools to assess the autonomic tone of a patient. But thermography is one of the most sensitive and fastest responding. And so very often we can quickly see if the sympathetic tone is kind of balanced or not, because your sympathetics are what control how dilated or constricted the blood vessels are. So with thermography, if you got equal sympathetic tone, you should have equal temperature bilaterally in the body. If you've got unbalanced sympathetics, right, dysautonomia or subluxation, agitation due to a misalignment or a biomechanical lesion, very often we will see a disruption in that sympathetic tone. And so thermography is a great way to assess that. We assess it on the spine because it's the most centralized mid-sagittal point to assess that balance. And so that's like, in a nutshell, how I would explain it to a provider, right? I'm not going to necessarily go into sympathetic tone and, you know, brainstem physiology to a patient, but providers, I think, need to appreciate that we are measuring the impact of spinal alignment and instability on the autonomic nervous system. That's what we're monitoring before and after any clinical intervention that we do. And it's cool. And the neat thing about that is that there's not many tests out there that monitor for dysautonomias other than like a tilt table test or the heart rate variability, or there's cold stimulation. There's all these different ways that like some neurologists will test for autonomic function, but thermography is just extremely sensitive. It's completely safe, and it's reliable. It's very, 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 very reliable. So it's an easy thing to explain to them. I think that's it with that. Now the last question, and this is kind of like just totally unrelated, but I figured I could knock out thermography pretty fast. I really love thermography. I think it's critical. Wouldn't practice without it. But the last question, just a little twofer today. Shout out to my boy Derek and Andrea. There are some people out of Wichita, I do believe, Barrett Chiropractic. But they're starting to attract cases that travel from a great distance, and that's something that you'll see in upper cervical. There's a lot of great chiropractors all throughout the country. Upper cervical, there tends to be not as many that are exclusively upper cervical. There might be like 3 or 4 in every major city. And so very often you'll have people traveling in to see you because they're really trying to find an upper cervical specialist, chiropractor that specializes in upper cervical. So with that said, how do you approach that? And that's a fair question. And I've seen it done a couple different ways. We've seen, the Scott Rosas of the world, with all due respect, because there's a lot of respect due to Dr. Rosa. And that, so those are specialists that people will travel from all across the country, or even or in the world, or even Michael Burkan up in Michigan doing the Meniere's kind. He's known for helping a lot of patients with Meniere's disease, so he's kind of like the Meniere's guy. And people will go and stay on site for a couple days or a week and get worked on, and then usually they are sent back to a chiropractor that can help. And what I was going to say, I was going to talk about kind of like the futility of some of that, because it's a lot of money, because they have the patient stay for like a week at a time. But in all reality, it's kind of the best working model, because what can you do? They can't come out to see you multiple days a week if they're driving 5 hours one way. It's just not realistic. So what you have to do is see, is there anyone near them that can duplicate your services? That's obviously integrity. And if there's not, then the next best thing with integrity is that they do need to come see you. So if they can't get that service closer to them, then they need to come see you, because if you're providing a exemplary service, something above and beyond what they can get in their hometown, and it's their health and they value it, then we should always seek for the best when it comes to our health. So if you can offer something better, then yes, come see me. It's worth the drive. And what we do in our office is we usually recommend, if they're coming from out of town, is to come in the morning on a given weekday, get their entire workup, and then go to lunch, come back, get their first adjustment, check in at a hotel, spend the night in town, come back the next morning, get reassessed, see how they're holding, and then go home. That's sort of right where I'm at right now. I could see where if they have a more severe issue, there's this idea of staying for a week at a time. Now that gets expensive for them, but there probably is some validity to that depending on the case. I haven't come across that yet. I mainly have them come in for the day, get adjusted, spend the night, come back the next morning, and then I find them somebody locally that we can educate on how to take care of this patient. If they don't have thermography, then we'll correlate our thermal findings with kind of a leg check pattern. And because we do Blair work, which is a side posture adjustment with a drop mechanism, a lot of chiropractors can, with some coaching, replicate the vectors a little bit. It's not as hard as trying. The tough thing about like Dr. Rosa and the percussion sound wave instrument corrections is there's no one in their hometown that has that. That's really hard to replicate. And it's really hard for patient positioning and all the nuances of that technique. It's really hard to replicate. With a hand adjustment, I think we can replicate that a little bit better with someone who's just got a lot of time as a chiropractor. They kind of understand the fast twitch muscles and things like that. So, but that's what we do. That's all we can do. Is they have to come see you, and then how long they stay is up to you, and then you do your best to train someone in their hometown to be able to replicate their care. Unless you want to open a satellite 5 hours away. That's it. That's all we got today, guys. Thank you so much. Oh, before you leave, I may have mentioned this before, but unless you've been living under a rock, you probably saw that I have some webinars coming up. The first one is called To Your Success, and I'd love for you to join me. I'm going to put the link in the comment section with this. It's a totally free registration, but it really is designed for students and new doctors to help set a vision for their life personally, for their family, their personal abundance, but also for their practice. And once you have a very clear vision, in the future we'll be going over kind of action steps and strategies to make that vision become a reality, predictably, with very little stress and maximum effort. All right, guys, that's all I got. Have an awesome week. Thanks for hanging out with me. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.